Most people don't survive their spiritual awakening. Not because it kills them, but because it unearths something so raw, so real, so untamed, that the personality they've spent a lifetime building shatters. They retreat, they numb, they return to the dream. Because truth, real truth, doesn't free you first. It breaks you. It breaks the illusions you worshipped, the stories you clung to, the masks you wore so long they became your skin. This is the part no one talks about. The part left out of every romanticized version of enlightenment. The screaming silence, the psychic death, the soul quake that leaves you trembling in a world that no longer makes sense. You are told that awakening is light, but that's only half the truth. The other half lives in shadow. And the moment you see through the veil, the world begins to dissolve. Not physically, but existentially. The meaning you assigned to everything collapses. Who you thought you were collapses. Your beliefs, your gods, your goals suddenly become hollow echoes in a chamber you can no longer live inside. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Because awakening doesn't arrive as comfort. It arrives as crisis. It begins the moment the life you've built starts to feel like a lie. Not a malicious lie, but a necessary one, a scaffolding to protect you from truths you weren't ready to face. But now, you're ready. Or at least something inside you is. Something ancient, something buried, something sacred and wild and irreversibly alive. And that something will not let you sleep again, not in the same way. The dreams you once chased now feel foreign. The people you once resonated with feel distant. The pleasures you once craved now leave you empty. And you're left with silence. A silence so loud it drowns out the voice you once called me. This is ego death. Not a metaphor, a real psychological death of identity. And if you resist it, it will hurt more. If you fight it, it will feel like madness. If you surrender, it will still tear you apart. But in the tearing, you will glimpse something eternal. This is why most people don't survive it. Because the old self doesn't go quietly. It screams, it clings, it bargains. It tells you that what you're feeling isn't real, that you're depressed, delusional, lost. And maybe you are. But only because the map you were given was never meant to lead you to yourself. You were taught how to succeed, how to conform, how to fit in, but never how to be real. Never how to descend, never how to fall inward and listen to the soul beneath the persona. And so the descent feels like destruction. But in truth, it's a sacred invitation, an initiation, a spiral down into the womb of your own becoming. You will be asked to let go. To let go of everything that isn't real, every label, every mask, every borrowed identity. You will lose things. You will lose people. You will lose versions of yourself you swore were permanent. And you must let them go. Because if you hold on, if you try to drag them into the new frequency, they will rot in your hands. You see, awakening doesn't give you a better version of your old life. It burns the old life to the ground and waits in the ashes to see what, if anything, dares to rise. And still, most people turn back. They choose comfort over truth. They choose applause over authenticity. They choose the known cage over the unknown wilderness. Because the wilderness is terrifying. It speaks a language the rational mind can't translate. It asks you to feel, to stay, to hold your gaze when the mirror shows you what you tried to forget. It shows you your shadow not as an enemy, but as a long-lost part of you begging to come home. The part that raged, the part that cried, the part that manipulated, feared, controlled. The part that didn't get love and so learned to survive without it. And now, to awaken fully, you must invite that part to the table. You must sit with your shadow and offer it something stronger than fear, compassion. But this is no small task, because the shadow doesn't speak kindly. It speaks in triggers, in projections, in pain. It shows up in the way you sabotage what you most want. It lives in your jealousy, your defensiveness, your addictions. And until you turn toward it, you will stay trapped in the loop. This is what most people don't understand. Awakening is not the end of suffering. It is the beginning of facing it, consciously, honestly, radically. And that is why so few make it through. Because awakening asks everything of you. It asks for your grief. It asks for your rage. It asks for your silence. It asks for your willingness to be reborn with no promise of who you'll become. It asks you to die while still breathing, to lose your mind, to find your soul, to watch the scaffolding collapse and say yes anyway. And in that yes, everything begins. The descent doesn't ask for your strength. It asks for your surrender. And that is what terrifies the ego most. Because the ego was built on control of perception, control of emotion, control of story. It was crafted to survive in a world that punishes vulnerability. But the soul doesn't care about survival. The soul came here to become. And becoming requires unmaking. You must unmake the armor, unmake the stories, unmake the scaffolding that told you who to be. Only then can something true emerge, not built from fear, but from essence. And that essence does not shout. It does not demand. It waits. It waits for the noise to die down, for the masks to slip, for the mind to exhaust itself with its own games. Then it whispers, not in words, but in ache, a deep, unmistakable ache for something more. Not more success, not more approval, more real, more whole, more alive. This ache is not a mistake. It is not depression. It is not dysfunction. It is the call, the sacred signal that you are ready to leave the lie behind. But here's the truth: most people hear the call and pretend it's nothing. They silence it with achievement. They drown it with distraction. They medicate it with routine. Because to answer the call means losing the world you built on sand. And no one warns you how lonely that is. The first stage of awakening isn't beauty, it's exile. Exile from the familiar. Exile from the socially acceptable self. Exile from the matrix of validation you didn't even know you lived inside. And in that exile, you will want to go back. You will crave the numbness, the predictability, the comfort of pretending. But something in you won't let you, not anymore. Because once you've glimpsed truth, you can't unknow it. Once you've felt the weight of your own soul, you can't return to the surface. And so you wander, through nights without sleep, through mornings filled with tears you can't explain, through relationships that begin to feel hollow even when no one did anything wrong. This is the space between selves, the cocoon, the void, the liminal zone where everything old has died and nothing new has yet taken root. It is terrifying, it is sacred, and it is where the soul does its deepest work. Here the shadow comes closer. No longer content to be denied, it shows itself in every trigger, every reaction, every unhealed wound rising to the surface like a scream from the deep. And you want to run. Of course you do. You were taught to run from pain, to fix it, to spiritualize it, to override it with affirmations and positive thoughts. But awakening is not a bypass. It is a confrontation. It is an unflinching look into the mirror of your own fragmentation. You are not asked to escape the pain. You are asked to meet it, to sit with it, to feel it, to let it teach you what comfort never could. And slowly you begin to see the pain was never the enemy. It was the doorway, the crack in the shell, the fault line where the light could enter. You begin to see that the anger, the sadness, the fear, they were never broken pieces. They were buried messengers, each carrying a fragment of your truth. And as you listen, you soften. You begin to feel something you haven't felt in years, maybe ever. Compassion, not just for others, for yourself, for the child in you who was never held, for the teenager who built armor just to survive, for the adult who confused productivity for purpose. You see it now, all of it, with tenderness, with awe, with the kind of grace that can only rise from the ashes of self-abandonment. And in that grace, something shifts. You stop needing to perform. You stop needing to be perfect. You stop needing to be healed. You begin to realize that awakening wasn't about becoming better. It was about becoming honest. Honest about the mess, honest about the beauty, honest about the paradox of being human divine and terrified eternal and breaking limitless and wounded. And somehow, that honesty becomes the ground you stand on. Not confidence, not certainty, but truth. You no longer need to convince anyone of who you are. You no longer need to belong in places that shrink your light. You no longer need to sacrifice your truth to feel safe. Because now you understand you are the safety. Not because you have it all figured out, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself in the places that hurt the most. You've stopped running, and that is everything. That is what most people never reach. Not because they're weak, but because they were never shown how to stay. To stay in discomfort, to stay in the unknown, to stay with the soul long enough for it to speak. But you are staying, and because you're staying, you will become something real. Not polished, not perfect, but rooted, aligned, unshakably alive. And that is the beginning of becoming unbreakable. You begin to see how much of your life was built on borrowed dreams. Dreams you never chose, they were chosen for you. By culture, by fear, by generations who didn't know what wholeness looked like, only what survival demanded. And survival demands that you shrink. It demands that you wear a mask, that you trade your soul for approval, that you bury your needs, your truth, your hunger beneath a smile that doesn't reach your eyes. But you're not surviving anymore. You're awakening. And with that awakening comes a sacred rage, a deep, thunderous, holy anger at the lie, at the roles you played, at the ways you betrayed yourself just to be accepted. And that rage is not a regression. It's a resurrection. It's the part of you that remembers I was never meant to live asleep. You begin to speak differently, not louder, but clearer. You say no without guilt. You say yes without over-explaining. You stop apologizing for being whole. And the world doesn't know what to do with this version of you. The world trained you to fit in, to behave, to blend. But now you're a frequency it can't predict. Now you're a truth it can't distort. Now you're a presence that reveals the unconscious in others simply by existing. This is the power of embodiment. Not talking about awakening, not posting about healing, but living it. Breathing it, becoming it in every unguarded moment. And it's not glamorous. It's not always poetic. Sometimes it looks like crying in your car because your nervous system is rewriting itself. Sometimes it looks like losing people you thought were forever because your truth became too loud for their silence. Sometimes it's grieving a life you built with love because you built it from a version of you that no longer exists. This is the cost of becoming. You don't just lose illusions, you lose identities. You lose comfort. You lose the scaffolding that once held you together and now holds you back. And what replaces it isn't immediate. It isn't certain. It isn't clean. It's a void. A vast holy emptiness where the old no longer belongs and the new hasn't yet formed. You wake up and don't know who you are. You walk through the world feeling both ancient and newborn. You try to speak and language feels too small. You try to plan and the future laughs. Because this space isn't for building, it's for listening. Listening to the whisper beneath the noise. The whisper that says, let go. Let go of the timeline. Let go of the blueprint. Let go of the need to know what this all means. Let it shape you. Let it strip you. Let it show you what remains when nothing is left to protect. And what remains is real. Not your persona, not your performance, not the curated identity you kept polishing like armor. What remains is breath. Presence. The deep pulse of being alive without needing to prove it. And in that space, you meet yourself. Not the self you hope to be, but the one who was always waiting. The wild one, the wounded one, the one who remembers why you came here before the world taught you to forget. You don't need to chase your purpose anymore. You become it in how you move, in how you speak, in how you stay soft when life demands you harden. You stop reaching for meaning like a ladder. You begin to embody meaning as a way of walking. A way of loving, a way of not abandoning your soul when the world goes dark. This is the deeper phase of awakening. The phase no one prepares you for, not because it's hidden, but because it cannot be taught. It can only be lived. It's not a destination. It's not a mountaintop moment. It's a rhythm, a return, a remembering of the self behind the shadow, the self before the conditioning, the self beyond the story. And when you begin to live from that place, not just visit, but truly live, everything changes. Not instantly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Your life becomes quieter, but fuller. You stop explaining yourself to those who never truly listened. You stop outsourcing your intuition to experts and systems. You stop betraying your inner knowing just to be liked. And something unexpected happens. You stop striving for love. Because you realize you are it. You are what you were always looking for. Not in the mirror, not in their eyes, not in the future, but here, now, within. And you begin to trust that the life aligned with your truth will reveal itself in time. That what falls away was never yours. That what stays will meet you on this deeper frequency. You no longer rush your becoming. You no longer beg for clarity. You no longer fear the unknown. Because now, the unknown feels like home. There is a different kind of strength born from surviving the soul's collapse. It's not loud. It doesn't flex. It doesn't shine in the way the world teaches you to measure power. It is quiet. It is sovereign. It is the strength of someone who knows who they are without needing to be seen. Because once you've died to everything that isn't real, what remains is unshakable. Not because it can't break, but because it is broken and returned in deeper form. You don't walk through life anymore looking for proof that you matter. You walk as proof, not to the world, to your own soul. To the part of you that remembers what it cost to reclaim your voice, to walk alone, to burn the lie, in order to feel real again. This kind of strength isn't built overnight. It's forged in fire, in the tremble before the truth, in the nights you thought you wouldn't survive. And now there's no need to survive. Now there's only the truth. You live simpler now. Not because life is easier, but because you no longer waste energy trying to be what you're not. You no longer build relationships out of fear of being alone. You no longer sell your time for praise. You no longer dilute your depth for acceptance. You've met yourself too deeply to pretend again. And what once felt like a curse, the exile, the unraveling, the silence now feels like grace. Because it brought you here, to this stillness, to this truth, to this inner sanctuary that nothing outside of you can ever give or take away. You watch others now as they run, perform, ache for belonging, chase, meaning like shadows. And you don't judge. Because you were there. Because you still carry the scar. But you also carry the light. Not the kind that blinds. The kind that beckons. The kind that says, you're allowed to stop running now. You're allowed to feel. You're allowed to come home to yourself. And some will. They will see in you what they've been dying to remember in themselves. And some won't. And that's okay, because you no longer need to wake others up. You simply need to stay awake, stay grounded, stay open, stay real. This is the quiet revolution. Not to fight the system, but to no longer feed it with your energy. Not to preach change, but to embody what can no longer be denied. Your very presence becomes a mirror. Not one that flatters, one that reflects. And some will shatter before it. Others will awaken. But your job isn't to manage their reflection. Your job is to remain the mirror, to remain the clarity, to remain the fire. This is how spiritual awakening becomes power. Not through performance, but through permanence. You become what cannot be moved. Because you no longer live from surface. You live from source. From the self that was never lost, only forgotten. And now you remember. You remember how to rest without guilt. You remember how to feel without shame. You remember how to speak without shrinking. You remember how to walk through the world without explaining yourself. Because your existence is no longer a question. It's an answer. You no longer ask, who am I supposed to be? You whisper, I already am. And that is the final threshold. Not becoming more, but becoming you. All of you, the holy, the messy, the divine, the broken, the healed, the unhealed, the becoming. All of it finally allowed. You are no longer trying to escape the human experience. You are here to inhabit it, fully, consciously, boldly. And this is why you survived your spiritual awakening. Not because you mastered it, not because you transcended it, but because you stayed. You stayed in the fire. You stayed when it broke you. You stayed when it emptied you. And in that staying, you were reborn. Not into someone better, into someone true. And now you carry something unspoken, a frequency, a remembering, a light not of performance, but of presence. And you walk through the world not seeking the next awakening, but living as the awakened. This is what most never reach. Not because they can't, but because they turn back too soon. You didn't. You turned inward. You turned toward. You turned into yourself and found home. So now walk. Not to chase, but to radiate. Not to prove, but to be. And let the world feel what can only be felt in the presence of someone who has touched the fire and did not run.
Why empaths leave without warning and never return is not merely a question of heartbreak or misunderstanding. It is a descent into the hidden architecture of the psyche, where the most sensitive among us are moved by forces deeper than choice, deeper than will, into the silent urgency of self-preservation. Jung once wrote that the unconscious does not ask for permission. It intervenes when consciousness has failed to protect life itself. And in the case of the empath, this intervention often takes the form of disappearance, sudden, final, and absolute. Imagine someone who has spent months, even years, offering unyielding patience, forgiveness, and attentiveness. To those around them, the relationship appears safe, perhaps even harmonious. But beneath the surface, another story is being written, one invisible to both the empath and the other. Jung discovered that highly sensitive individuals often possess unconscious boundary systems that operate below awareness, silently recording every manipulation, every subtle dismissal, every small cruelty. Their introverted intuition functions like a radar scanning for toxins in the atmosphere of the soul. At first they dismiss it, perhaps telling themselves they are paranoid, overreacting, too fragile. But the unconscious keeps count, and when the weight of unprocessed pain becomes unbearable, a silent emergency ignites. For Jung, this was a dangerous discovery. He realized that these empaths do not leave because of an argument or dramatic betrayal. They leave because their psyche executes what he called psychic emergency surgery. The unconscious, overwhelmed by toxicity, forces an abrupt withdrawal to prevent annihilation. To outsiders, it appears cruel, even senseless. No explanation, no warning, just silence. Yet this silence is not rejection but self-rescue, a final line of defense when every conscious effort has failed. One of Jung's patients illustrated this pattern vividly. She endured a relationship filled with subtle control and manipulation. Outwardly, she smiled, remained accommodating, and even appeared more attentive in the final months. But her dreams betrayed another truth. Images of drowning, of burning houses, of carrying unbearable stones. Then one morning, without quarrel or farewell, she was gone. To her partner, it seemed madness. To Jung, it was the unconscious seizing control, severing ties that the conscious mind could not. He wrote that when the conscious ego refuses to draw boundaries, the unconscious will do so with ruthless efficiency. This is the paradox. The empath's compassion becomes their prison. The more threatened they feel unconsciously, the more generous and forgiving they become consciously. Jung called this the inverse boundary response. By giving more, they signal infinite tolerance, creating a false sense of security that lulls others into believing all is well. Thus, when departure comes, it is not only sudden, but incomprehensible. How could someone so loving vanish overnight? Here lies the cruelty of empathy, unprotected. It invites exploitation while masking its own collapse. The empath believes they are preserving love by accommodating, yet they are in truth erasing themselves. Their identity dissolves into the needs of the other until the unconscious rebels. At this breaking point, no explanation is possible. How do you describe years of invisible erosion? How do you name the countless small wounds that left no external scar but hollowed out the soul? For Jung, silence itself became the only adequate language, a refusal to be drawn back into cycles of gaslighting, denial, or manipulation. But if we look more deeply, we see this is not just personal psychology, it is myth. In every culture, there is the archetype of disappearance. Persephone descending into the underworld, Inanna stripped of her garments at the gates, the shaman who vanishes into the wilderness to commune with spirits. The empath's vanishing is part of this archetypal drama. It is not an act of abandonment, but of transformation. In Jungian terms, it is the shadow erupting, demanding recognition of what has been denied. The empath who disappears is undergoing an individuation crisis, the moment when the false self built on endless giving shatters so that a truer self might be born. Yet society often misreads this. We live in a culture that romanticizes self-sacrifice, that praises those who pour themselves endlessly into others without asking for reciprocity. The empath fits this cultural script too well until they don't. Their departure exposes the hidden imbalance, revealing relationships that were never mutual but parasitic. Jung called this a teaching through absence. The sudden silence becomes a mirror in which the other must confront their dependency, their consumption of another's soul, without giving in return. The empath's disappearance is thus both personal salvation and cultural critique. It says, love without respect is not love. Connection without reciprocity is exploitation. Sensitivity without boundaries is self-destruction. To leave without warning is to embody these truths not as theory, but as survival. And what of the empath themselves after they vanish? Jung observed that many undergo rapid inner change once removed from the toxic field. Freed from constant accommodation, their energy returns. Their clarity sharpens their unconscious, no longer needs to scream through dreams and symptoms. What once felt like unbearable loss becomes the soil of renewal. He called this psychological molting, like a snake shedding old skin that had become suffocating. To return would be to climb back into that discarded skin, an act the psyche will not permit. This is why empaths rarely, if ever, return. It is not pride or stubbornness, it is impossibility. To re-enter would mean to betray the very self that has just been rescued from destruction. Jung compared it to the body rejecting a lethal toxin once expelled. The nervous system revolts, producing panic, dread, even physical illness. The unconscious, having marked the relationship as lethal, forbids re-exposure. So when we ask why empaths leave without warning and never return, we are not really asking about choice, but about necessity. We are asking about the deep laws of psychic survival, the hidden mechanisms by which the soul preserves itself when all else has failed. Jung's discovery was not simply that sensitive people vanish, but that this vanishing is an archetypal drama, the soul's way of ensuring that what is sacred within us cannot be destroyed by the demands of others. The silence after an empath departs is rarely empty. It echoes like a cathedral stripped of its congregation, vast, uncanny, filled with unanswered questions. Those left behind often ask, why didn't they tell me? Why didn't they give me a chance to change? But to understand the absence of explanation, we must return to Jung's recognition of the unconscious as both protector and trickster. Once the unconscious has seized command, the capacity to negotiate, to explain, even to rationalize collapses. To speak is to risk being pulled back into the very patterns that suffocated them. Silence becomes not avoidance, but the final sanctuary. Jung documented 3 phases that occur before this silence crystallizes. First comes the silent alarm, subtle warnings in dreams, bodily tension, a vague sense of unease that the conscious mind dismisses as overthinking. Then the phase of psychological pressure. The empath grows increasingly exhausted, weighed down by invisible burdens, yet outwardly doubles their giving, hoping to restore balance through more accommodation. Finally comes the emergency override, a rupture in which the unconscious takes full command, initiating the act of departure with ruthless precision. From the outside, it looks sudden. From within, it has been years in the making. What makes this process so bewildering to others is the empath's ability to camouflage their suffering. They become, in a sense, their own illusionists, projecting warmth even as they internally collapse. Jung recognized this as a tragic paradox. The more danger the empath senses, the more nurturing they appear. He called this dynamic the false security veil. The relationship seems safe to everyone except the empath's unconscious, which is quietly preparing the exit. Yet Jung was not only cataloging pathology. He was also tracing the outline of a deeper archetype, the archetype of the wounded healer who absorbs pain until the wound itself begins to speak. In myth, this figure often vanishes into wilderness or exile, not because they despise the tribe, but because their healing must begin in solitude. The empath's departure is a modern enactment of this archetype. By vanishing, they refuse to perpetuate cycles of exploitation and instead retreat to recover their soul. Consider the 4 disappearance patterns Jung outlined. The phantom vanish, total erasure without warning, a clean severing of ties. The gradual fade, a slow diminishment of presence like a candle flickering down to smoke. The boundary explosion, one small incident triggering a torrent of withheld anger and the sudden imposition of rigid walls. And finally, the silent protection, the conscious recognition of danger and a strategic withdrawal, often with vague notes or gestures that resist manipulation. Each form, while different in style, carries the same essence, a refusal to negotiate with toxicity. Why is negotiation absent? Because for the empath, negotiation has already happened 1,000 times in silence. Every inner rationalization, every self-sacrifice, every night spent excusing the inexcusable, this is the negotiation process, invisible to others. By the time departure comes, there is nothing left to discuss. Jung noted that explanations often invite more gaslighting. To explain is to offer the manipulator new material. Thus, silence protects. And yet beneath this silence lies transformation. Once separated, the empath undergoes what Jung described as clarity restoration. It is as if fog lifts, revealing landscapes they had never truly seen. Behaviors that once seemed minor now appear as clear patterns of control. Subtle dismissals suddenly reveal themselves as systemic invalidations. This new vision makes return impossible. It would be akin to walking back into a burning house now that one recognizes the flames. But the process is not purely psychological. It is existential. To disappear is to perform an act of individuation. In Jung's framework, individuation is the journey by which a person integrates their unconscious shadow and archetypal dimensions into a more whole self. For the empath, leaving without warning is often the first true step into individuation. It is the moment they stop living as the endless accommodator, the archetypal giver without end, and begin discovering boundaries, autonomy, and voice. Society, however, rarely celebrates this. Cultures built on self-sacrifice interpret departure as betrayal. Families call it abandonment. Partners label it cruelty. But Jung would counter what appears as cruelty to the one who consumed is survival to the one who was consumed. Here we find a cultural shadow, the hidden expectation that sensitivity exists to serve others. When empaths break that expectation, they are accused of selfishness. Yet this accusation only exposes how deeply their compassion was exploited. The archetype of disappearance teaches something to both sides. For the empath, it is the call to individuation, to shed false skins and reclaim sovereignty. For those left behind, it is the mirror of absence, forcing them to ask, did I love this person, or did I only love their endless giving? Jung described this as absence education. The void left by the empath becomes a silent teacher. Some awaken recognizing their own parasitism and changing. Others rage, revealing they never cared for the person, but only for the resource. And here lies the collective dimension of the empath's journey. Jung believed that individual psychological events also function as messages for the collective unconscious. When empaths disappear, they are not only protecting themselves, but unconsciously modeling a new possibility for relationship connection grounded in reciprocity, not consumption. They become, in his words, empathy exemplars, living demonstrations that sensitivity requires boundaries, that love without respect is no love at all. The empath who leaves without warning is therefore not simply escaping, but participating in a broader human evolution. Their silence teaches that emotional intelligence is not the same as emotional servitude. Their vanishing demonstrates that compassion without self-respect is unsustainable, and their refusal to return announces with quiet finality that the era of one-sided sacrifice must end if genuine connection is to begin. When Jung explored these patterns more deeply, he recognized that the empath's sudden departure was not a quirk of temperament, but part of a much larger psychic drama. The unconscious, he argued, operates with the wisdom of evolution. Just as the body rejects poison, so too does the psyche eject what threatens its integrity. In this light, the empath's vanishing is not weakness but instinct, an ancient survival mechanism clothed in modern relationships. Yet the most disturbing element of Jung's discovery was the finality. Unlike quarrels that lead to reconciliation or separations that leave a door half open, the empath's departure is total. Jung observed that attempts to return often resulted in psychic recoil, panic attacks, depression, even physical illness. The unconscious, having classified the relationship as lethal, forbids re-exposure. He described this as the psyche's permanent protective protocols. To return would be like willingly drinking from a cup once marked as poison. This introduces three barriers that make return nearly impossible. The first is unconscious protection. Once boundaries have been enforced by the unconscious, they function like mythic guardians at the gate, ensuring the individual does not re-enter dangerous terrain. The second is transformation. In separation, the empath undergoes rapid interchange. They recover depleted energy, develop stronger boundaries, and begin to see patterns once invisible. To return would mean undoing this growth, climbing back into a discarded self. The third is reality recognition. Away from the fog of manipulation, they see with startling clarity how deeply their sensitivity was exploited. Returning would now feel like self-betrayal. Jung likened this process to psychological molting. Just as a snake cannot crawl back into old skin, so too the empath cannot return to a role of endless accommodation. Something essential has been shed. The empath who leaves without warning has stepped onto the path of individuation, and individuation never moves backward. But how can empaths avoid reaching such catastrophic breaking points? Jung developed methods to help sensitive individuals recognize unconscious warnings before crisis forced them into disappearance. He advised them to track correlations between dreams, bodily sensations, and relational dynamics. For example, chaotic dreams, sudden exhaustion, or physical tension around certain people were signals not to be dismissed as overthinking, but recognized as unconscious alarms. He also recommended boundary testing, setting small limits, a refusal, a delay, a request for space, and observing the response. Healthy people respect boundaries. Toxic people violate them. Such experiments reveal truth without dramatic confrontation. Energy tracking was another tool. Jung urged empaths to measure their vitality before and after interactions. If contact consistently drained them despite surface-level harmony, this indicated toxicity. Energy is the currency of the soul, he suggested. Where it leaks, there is danger. And in communication, Jung proposed simple framework statements like, "I need more space," instead of long explanations that invite manipulation. Boundaries are intentions, not negotiations. These practices Jung believed could transform unconscious departure into conscious choice. Instead of vanishing without explanation, empaths could learn to protect themselves before collapse. The goal was not to abandon empathy, but to integrate it with boundaries, creating what Jung called the consciously empathic individual, sensitive by choice, rather than compulsion. The danger of remaining unconscious, however, was stark. Jung observed that repeated patterns of silent departure could erode trust and reinforce guilt, trapping empaths in cycles of accommodation, followed by abrupt disappearance. Worse, they risked what he described as accommodation addiction. a compulsion to prove their worth by giving endlessly even when it destroyed them. This addiction, he warned, was as destructive as any substance, feeding the ego's desire to feel needed while obliterating authentic connection. To illustrate both the peril and possibility of empathy, Jung often drew parallels to historical figures. Virginia Woolf, for instance, embodied the pain of empathic overwhelm. Her letters reveal a woman drowning in the emotions of others, losing connection to her own center. Her final act of departure, not from a relationship, but from life itself, stood as a tragic reminder of sensitivity without protection. By contrast, Maya Angelou exemplified the strength of conscious departure. Her ability to walk away from toxic ties to honor her intuitive warnings was what Jung would have recognized as integration, the wisdom of believing the unconscious the first time. Carl Rogers, though celebrated for his empathy as a therapist, demonstrated that empathy must be disciplined by boundaries. He remained deeply compassionate, yet maintained professional structures that protected both himself and his clients. His success was not unlimited availability, but conscious regulation. And Eleanor Roosevelt, once an accommodating wife, transformed into an independent leader. Her sensitivity, redirected toward justice and collective care, became a source of strength rather than a wound. From these lives, Jung distilled a pattern. Those who integrated their sensitivity trusted their inner warnings and acted on them consciously. Those who denied or suppressed these signals either disappeared abruptly or broke under the weight of exploitation. Integration was not about becoming less sensitive, but about honoring sensitivity as sacred. Here, Jung's vision extended beyond the individual. He saw empaths as pioneers of emotional evolution. Their struggles mirrored the collective's struggle, humanity learning to balance connection with protection, compassion with boundaries. Every empath who transformed their unconscious departures into conscious choices became, in his view, a model for healthier relational dynamics. For Jung, this was not just psychology, it was culture, even destiny. When empaths learned to guard their sensitivity without abandoning it, they created a ripple effect. Families, workplaces, communities began to shift. He called this authenticity pressure. When the most accommodating person in a system began setting limits, others were forced to evolve or reveal their dependency. The empath, once exploited, became the silent catalyst of transformation. And so the empath who leaves without warning is not only rescuing themselves, they are embodying a deeper truth about loved one that culture often resists. Love cannot exist where boundaries are absent. Their departure, devastating as it may feel, is an act of teaching through absence, a mirror held up to both individuals and society, reflecting the need for reciprocity, respect, and conscious connection. The tragedy of the empath's journey is not only their suffering, but the traps that prevent them from reaching integration. Jung identified several of these snares, each one a distortion of growth that keeps sensitivity imprisoned. The first is the overcorrection trap, when after years of self-erasure, the empath swings to the opposite extreme, cutting themselves off from all vulnerability, becoming cold, distant, and impenetrable. In this armor they are safe, but they are also alone. Jung warned that overcorrection is not true individuation, but another mask, a shadow reaction that protects the wound by denying the heart. Then there is the guilt spiral. As empaths begin setting boundaries, toxic individuals often escalate their manipulations, weaponizing guilt. They accuse the empath of being selfish, cold, or unloving. Because the empath has long measured their worth by how much they give, these accusations strike like daggers. Jung noted that the key here is recognition. The way a person responds to your boundary is the truth of their character. To mistake manipulation for truth is to fall back into the cycle. To see it clearly is liberation. Another common snare is what Jung called the explanation addiction, the compulsion to justify every boundary with lengthy reasoning, as if the validity of self-protection required another's consent. Yet the more words the empath uses, the more they invite debate, persuasion, or gaslighting. Jung emphasized that boundaries are statements, not negotiations. To say, "I need rest," is sufficient. To explain endlessly is to reopen the door to violation. Some fall into the isolation overreaction, fleeing from all connection, believing that solitude alone can guarantee safety. While solitude is essential for healing, permanent withdrawal denies the empath their true gift. Sensitivity thrives not in exile, but in conscious relationship, where it can become a source of depth, creativity, and love. Jung observed that without learning discernment, isolation becomes another prison, preventing the soul from participating in the world. To maintain balance, Jung prescribed practices, not rigid rules, but living disciplines. Regular solitude, he said, is as vital as food. The empath must retreat into silence to process the emotions they absorb. Creative expression becomes another necessity, a channel for transforming overwhelm into art, music, or story, where sensitivity nourishes rather than drains. Equally important are relationships with emotionally mature individuals, those who respect no as easily as they accept yes. Finally, he advised what he called boundary practice, the small, consistent setting of limits, like a muscle that must be exercised to grow strong. These practices served not only individual healing, but what Jung saw as an evolutionary function. Sensitive individuals, once integrated, model a new way of being human. They show that empathy without boundaries is martyrdom, but empathy with boundaries is transformation. When empaths leave toxic systems, they create what Jung described as authenticity. Pressure, the force that compels groups to either evolve or expose their dysfunction. A family, a workplace, or a community cannot remain unchanged when the most accommodating member steps out of the role. Suddenly, others must grow or collapse. This is why Jung considered the empath's departure not just personal but collective. He described it as absence education, the lesson taught not by words, but by vanishing. When the source of endless comfort disappears, those who remain must confront their dependency. Some awaken learning, reciprocity, and respect. Others reveal their parasitism, grieving not the person, but the loss of their resource. In either case, the departure becomes a mirror, reflecting the true nature of the relationship. From a symbolic perspective, this absence is archetypal. It is the withdrawal of the goddess into the underworld, the exile of the prophet into the desert, the hermit's retreat into the cave. In myth, such vanishings always serve a dual function. They protect the sacred, and they force the community to reckon with its own shadow. The empath who leaves without warning is living out this archetype, embodying a mythic truth in personal form. For children and young adults, the modeling of integrated empathy is especially vital. Jung noted that when they witness sensitive adults maintaining boundaries while remaining loving, they learn a priceless lesson that sensitivity and self-respect are not contradictions. This is cultural inheritance at its finest, the passing down of emotional intelligence, not through lecture, but through example. To see a parent, teacher, or mentor say, "I care for you, but I also care for myself," is to witness a new form of strength. From this perspective, empaths who integrate their gift become what Jung called empathy exemplars. They are not saints, endlessly bleeding for others, nor are they cynics barricading their hearts. They are bridges between vulnerability and wisdom, showing that love is deepest when it does not destroy the one who gives it. Their lives declare that compassion without protection is unsustainable, but compassion with protection can heal individuals, relationships, even cultures. And perhaps this was Jung's most radical insight, that the empath's struggle is not marginal, not a footnote in psychology, but a preview of humanity's next stage of evolution. He saw in their suffering the seeds of collective transformation. The empath's vanishing is both a cry of pain and a prophecy, a sign that relationships built on exploitation cannot endure, that cultures demanding endless sacrifice will eventually be abandoned, that sensitivity, long despised as weakness, is in truth a form of higher intelligence awaiting integration. The empath who disappears without warning is therefore not only fleeing but prophesying. Their silence whispers a future where love is mutual, where respect is the ground of intimacy, where empathy is honored as sacred rather than consumed as fuel. And though they may never return, their absence leaves behind an indelible teaching. The human soul can endure much, but it cannot survive without boundaries. When Jung reflected on the long arc of empathic development, he saw a series of stages. not random fluctuations of sensitivity, but a patterned journey of transformation. The first is the recognition crisis, often triggered by a devastating loss, the moment an empath realizes that their boundless accommodation did not prevent abandonment, but in fact enabled mistreatment. Here lies the seed of awakening. The recognition that sensitivity is valuable, but unprotected, it becomes a magnet for exploitation. The second stage is boundary experimentation. The empath, long conditioned to say yes, begins to whisper no. The first attempts feel like betrayal, guilt gnaws at them, fear of rejection looms. Yet in these fragile moments they discover a revelation: healthy people respect boundaries, toxic people punish them. With every experiment, clarity grows. The empath begins to distinguish between those who honor their humanity and those who only consume it. The third stage is intuitive integration. Here the empath learns to trust their inner warnings. No longer do they dismiss the anxiety in their chest, the chaotic dreams, the exhaustion after certain interactions. These signals are not paranoia, but wisdom, the unconscious speaking in its native tongue. Jung emphasized that the line between intuition and anxiety is thin, but discernment sharpens with practice. Over time, the empath recognizes when their inner voice is guiding them away from danger rather than toward fear. The fourth stage is conscious choice. No longer enslaved by compulsion, the empath chooses where to invest their sensitivity. They cease scattering it indiscriminately, pouring into everyone who asks. Instead, they weigh, discern, and offer presence to those who reciprocate. Sensitivity becomes a gift placed with intention, not a flood spilling into any available vessel. Jung described this as the birth of the consciously empathic self, a being who feels deeply but acts wisely. Finally comes empathic mastery. Here, empathy is no longer a wound attracting predators, but a skill shared selectively. Boundaries are no longer an experiment, but an embodied truth. These empaths can love profoundly without dissolving into the other, can give generously without erasing themselves. They rarely need to leave relationships without warning because they intervene earlier, addressing problems directly and choosing companions who understand reciprocity. Jung believed these individuals embodied the promise of sensitivity, fulfilled depth, joined with strength, vulnerability, joined with wisdom. Yet he warned of traps even along this advanced path. The overcorrection trap tempts the empath to become impenetrable, losing the very gift they fought to protect. The guilt manipulation spiral lures them back into self-doubt as others weaponize compassion against them. The explanation addiction pulls them into endless justifications, draining their clarity. And the isolation overreaction convinces them that exile is the only safety. Each trap is a shadow distortion, an unfinished individuation. To navigate these dangers, Jung emphasized maintenance, a discipline of soul hygiene. Solitude is essential, not as permanent escape, but as sacred retreat where the empath can process and renew. Creative expression transforms sensitivity into art, making the wound a wellspring. Mature relationships offer mirrors of reciprocity, reminding the empath they need not walk alone. And boundary practice, small and consistent, builds the muscle of self-respect. Like physical training, it is not achieved once, but sustained over a lifetime. Through this integration, the empath transcends mere survival and enters the realm of cultural influence. Jung argued that integrated empaths perform a collective teaching function. Their very presence demonstrates that intimacy without exploitation is possible. When they refuse to accommodate endlessly, they elevate the standards of groups around them. Families evolve, workplaces shift, communities transform. This ripple effect Jung called authenticity pressure, the quiet force that compels systems to confront their dysfunction. In this sense, the empath's departure is not an end, but a catalyst. Their silence teaches through absence, their boundaries teach through example, and their integration teaches through presence. Each act, whether withdrawal or engagement, carries symbolic weight rippling outward into the collective unconscious. Jung saw in this not only individual healing, but the seeds of social transformation. For what is individuation if not the evolution of humanity expressed through individuals? The empath's path from unconscious accommodation to conscious mastery is a microcosm of what humanity itself must learn: to honor sensitivity without exploitation, to balance connection with autonomy, to recognize that love without respect is not love, but bondage. The empath who leaves without warning and never returns is therefore not simply a victim, nor merely a survivor. They are a pioneer enacting in their personal drama the archetypal shift from sacrifice to sovereignty. Their journey whispers a truth: the world desperately needs sensitivity is not weakness but power, and when protected, it becomes a force capable of reshaping relationships, cultures, even civilizations. So if you have ever vanished from a relationship without explanation, if you have ever chosen silence over justification, know this: you were not weak. You were not cruel. You were answering to a deeper law of the soul. And if you now learn to recognize those inner whispers before they rise to screams, if you choose conscious boundaries before unconscious rescue, then your empathy becomes not a wound, but a gift for yourself and for the world.
Jung's most dangerous discovery about empaths was not that they are gentle souls vulnerable to harm. It was that empaths carry within them something narcissists can never fully control: the untamed autonomy of the self. The narcissist can manipulate, seduce, intimidate, even imprison. But what Jung revealed is that the empath's essence, if awakened, is untouchable. The paradox is this: the very sensitivity that makes an empath seem fragile is the same power that renders them unconquerable. Today, I'll take you inside the hidden battle between the empath and the narcissist, a war waged not in words or gestures alone, but in the unconscious depths. You will see how Jung's map of the psyche illuminates this struggle, and why, despite all appearances, the empath is the one soul who cannot be colonized. Jung himself wrote of the unconscious as a living, autonomous force, an ocean deeper than the persona, wider than the ego. And when he studied the dynamics of projection and shadow, he stumbled upon a truth. The narcissist dreads control over another ends at the threshold of their inner self. Imagine a fortress carved into a mountain. On the outside, the gates can be stormed, the walls battered, but deep inside, there is a sanctum no invader can reach. That sanctum is the empath's inner life, their self in Jungian terms, and it is this that no narcissist can claim. Consider the story of a woman Jung treated, who lived with a domineering partner. On the surface, she seemed entirely subdued, her speech quiet. Here, gestures hesitant, her choices dictated by him. Yet, in her dreams, Jung found something extraordinary. Night after night, she dreamed of standing at the edge of a forest, hearing the voice of an unseen guide calling her name. Though she could not defy her partner in waking life, her psyche preserved a secret allegiance to freedom. Jung recognized this as the self's rebellion, erupting through the unconscious. It was proof that though her conscious ego felt enslaved, her deeper soul had never surrendered. This is the empath's hidden advantage. You know it in your own life, even when you have been gaslit, drained, or trapped in cycles of guilt. A whisper remains, a quiet no that no one can silence. That whisper is the crack in the narcissist's illusion of power. Jung explained that narcissists live almost entirely in the persona and the shadow. They build a mask for the world, and beneath it lies a reservoir of unknown darkness. They project this shadow onto those around them, seeking someone who will carry their disowned wounds. Empaths, with their open hearts, become the perfect screens. They absorb, reflect, and often believe this projection. Yet here lies the danger, for the narcissist: projections can dominate behavior, but they cannot annihilate essence. To control an empath fully, the narcissist would need to silence the self, but the self, Jung insisted, is autonomous. It speaks through dreams, symptoms, synchronicities, through sudden moments of rebellion that even the empath cannot explain. This is why empaths, no matter how entangled, eventually feel the stirrings of escape. One day, without warning, they walk out, and once they do, they rarely return. But before that moment of freedom, there is the crucible. The empath must descend into the shadow of their own being. They must confront why they tolerated the narcissist's spell, why they mistook domination for love, why they confused sacrifice with intimacy. This descent is painful. It feels like staring into a mirror that cracks open the heart. But only through this descent can they reclaim their inner fortress. And here is where your own journey begins. You must ask yourself, where have I allowed another's voice to drown out my own? Where have I confused being needed with being valued? Where has my gift of empathy become my chain? These questions are not accusations. They are keys. Keys that open the gate to yourself, the one thing that no narcissist can touch. Every empath must awaken to the truth. Their sensitivity is not weakness. It is radar. It perceives the lies beneath the narcissist's mask. It detects the tremor in their fortress of control. And once the empath trusts that radar, the balance of power shifts. The narcissist senses it and grows frantic. Because deep down, they know they can manipulate behavior, but they cannot command essence. In Jung's words, the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality. Just as the ego is the center of consciousness, the narcissist can orbit the ego, but they will never own the circumference. And so the empath, when they awaken, becomes untouchable, not because they resist, but because they remember. Remember the forest within. Remember the voice calling their name. Remember that no matter how convincing the narcissist's illusion, their soul is already sovereign. The empath's journey into Jung's depths does not end with the realization that their essence is untouchable. That is only the first spark, the ignition. What follows is a descent, a confrontation with forces that live within as much as they live without. For Jung insisted the enemy we meet outside is only the mirror of the one we have yet to face within. And so, when an empath escapes the orbit of a narcissist, the true trial begins, the shadow descent. Picture it. The empath leaves the fortress of the narcissist's control, but soon finds themselves in another kind of prison, the prison of their own wounds. Why did they stay so long? Why did they feel responsible for the other's suffering? Why did their own needs seem invisible? These questions cut deeper than any chains the narcissist ever cast, because they pierce into the psyche's darkest chambers. Jung encountered this over and over in his patients. One young man, endlessly drained by a domineering father, had internalized the belief that his worth existed only in service. When his father demanded silence, he obeyed. When his father demanded sacrifice, he complied. And even after leaving home, he found himself drawn to relationships that mirrored the same pattern: partners who consumed him, friends who took but never gave. Jung recognized this as the archetype of the sacrificial son, a pattern lodged in the unconscious. To break free, the young man had to meet his shadow face to face, the rage he had suppressed, the desire he had denied, the right to exist for himself that had been buried under years of submission. And this is where you, too, must enter your own crucible. The narcissist may no longer be at your side, but their voice echoes within you, that inner critic that whispers, "You are selfish if you say no," that guilt that coils in your stomach when you choose your own path. These are the remnants of projection, the shadows the narcissist placed upon you, now living as phantoms inside your psyche. To break free, you cannot simply run from them. You must invite them into the fire. Jung called this process individuation, the alchemical transformation of the soul. in which the fragments of the psyche are burned, melted, and reforged into wholeness. For the empath, individuation means no longer confusing compassion with compliance. It means seeing the difference between listening and losing oneself, between caring and collapsing, between love and self-erasure. But the path is not linear. The empath often resists their own power. They fear becoming what they despise. If I claim my voice, am I not just as domineering as the narcissist? Jung would answer, no, because power without empathy corrupts, but empathy without power enslaves. Only when the two are joined, the strength of the animus for women, the receptivity of the anima for men, does the psyche become whole. This union is terrifying, because it means integrating what you have denied. For the empath, that often means reclaiming anger. Anger that is not cruelty, but clarity. Anger that says, here is my boundary, and it is sacred. Jung wrote that emotions, when repressed, grow monstrous, but when acknowledged, they become guides. In this way, anger becomes the guardian of empathy, ensuring it flows where it is deserved, not where it is exploited. Imagine standing in front of a mirror cracked by years of projection. As you touch the shards, you see not only your wounds, but also your reflection restored. You realize you are not weak for feeling deeply. You are strong for still hearing your own voice through the noise. This realization is not just intellectual, it is visceral, like breathing after years underwater. And yet, Jung would warn, freedom has a cost. Once the empath awakens, there is no returning to ignorance. You will feel more deeply, not less. You will see the games others play, the masks they wear, and you will never again be able to pretend. This is the double-edged gift of individuation. It strips illusions away, and with them, the comforting blindness that once kept you docile. But in that stripping, it gives you sovereignty. Modern psychology echoes what Jung intuited, that empaths who break from narcissistic control often experience a period of disorientation. The world feels raw, overwhelming, even lonely. This is the nigredo of alchemy, the blackening stage, when all certainties dissolve. But within this darkness lies the seed of gold, the realization that your worth does not depend on another's need for you. The narcissist, sensing this transformation, often grows disparity. They may attempt to hoover you back with promises, guilt, or rage. But once you have glimpsed yourself, the fortress within, they no longer hold the same power. Their words, once binding, now sound hollow. Their demands, once overwhelming, now feel absurd. You recognize them for what they are, fragments of their own unowned shadow, seeking a host, and you no longer volunteer to carry them. This is the turning point. You step from the crucible, not as a victim, but as an alchemist. The raw material of your suffering has been transmuted into sovereignty. You know now that your empathy is not a leash to be pulled, but a gift to be offered freely, with choice. And choice, Jung reminds us, is the mark of the self. But here is the paradox. Jung saw most clearly the empath who emerges from the crucible does not become less sensitive, they become more. Sensitivity, once hijacked by the narcissist, becomes sharpened into discernment. What once overwhelmed now illuminates. The empath learns to feel not as a prisoner of other people's shadows, but as an interpreter of the psyche's deeper truths. Think of the alchemical image. Jung loved the phoenix rising from its ashes. To the outside world, the empath may appear fragile, yet within burns the fire of transformation. The narcissist, who feeds on control, cannot comprehend this rebirth, because their entire existence depends on maintaining the illusion of a static, dominant self. They do not rise from ashes, they cling to masks, The empath, however, has passed through the flames. They are no longer the same. This is why narcissists can never fully control empaths, because empaths are built for transformation. And transformation is the one terrain the narcissist cannot navigate. The narcissist resists change at all costs, terrified of the abyss within. But the empath, once awakened, has walked through that abyss. They have seen their own shadow and survived. They know the terrain of pain, and therefore they are no longer afraid of it. Jung saw individuation not as a path of comfort, but as a heroic journey. He compared it to the mythic descent into the underworld, where one must wrestle demons and recover the treasure hidden in darkness. For the empath, the treasure is sovereignty, the ability to give without losing oneself, to love without surrendering the self. In Jung's words, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and this privilege, once claimed, is beyond any narcissist's grasp. But what does this look like in your life? Here and now, it looks like listening to the quiet signals of your body when your stomach knots, when your chest tightens, when your energy drains in someone's presence. These are not weaknesses, they are messages from the unconscious, guiding you towards alignment. Jung would call this the voice of the self, speaking through instinct. And when you heed it, you step out of the trap of projection. It looks like reclaiming anger as sacred fire, not rage that burns indiscriminately, but flame that illuminates boundaries. When you say no from that place, it is not cruelty, it is truth. And truth, as Jung taught, liberates not only you, but also the other, forcing them to face their own shadow, should they choose to. It looks like remembering that empathy is choice. You do not have to pour yourself into every empty vessel. You can discern who is ready to receive your gift, and who only seeks to drain it. This is individuation in practice, no longer being governed by unconscious compulsion, but by conscious alignment. The cost, of course, is loneliness. There are moments when your vision will set you apart. You may watch others fall for the masks you now see through. You may long for the simplicity of blindness. Jung called this the burden of consciousness, the pain of knowing what others refuse to see. But he also called it liberation, because in that awareness, you are no longer a pawn in another's game. And this is where your transformation touches something larger. For when an empath refuses control, they do not only heal themselves, they break the chain of projection that has bound generations. Jung wrote of the collective unconscious, the great web of humanity's archetypes and wounds. When you reclaim yourself, you do not do so in isolation. You shift the collective. You become a model of sovereignty in a world addicted to domination and submission. So when the narcissist attempts to return, when they send messages dripping with guilt, or promises coated in honey, you will feel the old pull. But now you recognize it. You stand at the edge of the forest, and you hear again the voice calling your name. You remember, the fortress within is yours alone. And with that memory, you choose differently. Your empathy becomes luminous. It no longer bends you toward those who would consume it. Instead, it radiates outward to those who are ready to meet it. This is the final stage of the empath's journey, not escape, not resistance, but sovereignty. You are no longer the mirror for another's shadow. You are the mirror of your own wholeness. And so the truth stands. As Jung would have it, the narcissist can imprison your persona, exploit your shadow, manipulate your guilt, but they can never touch the self. That self is the flame that no hand can extinguish, the voice that no domination can silence. And when you claim it, you become the one thing the narcissist will always fear untouchable. If this awakening stirs within you, comment, "I am untouchable in my essence." Your sovereignty is not only your shield, it is the spark that helps light the way for humanity's evolution. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.